It starts small. You're sitting there, maybe with people you know, and someone cuts you off mid-sentence. You pause for a second, but then you let it slide. Someone ignores what you said, like it didn't matter, and you pretend it's fine. Someone crosses a line right in front of you, and you smile like it didn't happen. But you feel it, don't you? That tight feeling in your chest. That split second where something inside you says, "This was not okay." And still, you say nothing. You feel that moment where you should have said something, where you should have stopped it right there. But you didn't. You let it pass, like it meant nothing, like it wasn't worth it. You call it patience. You call it maturity. But what you're really doing is teaching people how to treat you. Because respect is not lost in one big moment. It disappears quietly through patterns. And every time you stay silent, every time you tolerate what you know you shouldn't, you're not being calm. You're showing people how little it takes to cross you. And once they see that, they don't question it. They don't hesitate. They just stop respecting you. Niccolò Machiavelli, the man who understood the darkest corners of human nature, knew this centuries ago. He knew that the moment you are seen as weak, you are already conquered. He didn't write The Prince for people who wanted to be liked. He wrote it for people who wanted to survive. So if you are tired of being the one who gives more than they get, if you are tired of feeling invisible in a room full of people, then listen closely. Because what you're about to hear is not comfortable, but it might be exactly what you need. We're about to cut into the parts of you that are killing your respect. The second mistake you make is not having boundaries. You let people get too comfortable with you. At first, it feels normal. You think you are just being easy to deal with. You don't want to look difficult, so you stay quiet. You adjust. You let things go. Imagine this. You are in a conversation. You are finally about to say something, and someone cuts you off. You stop. You wait. You think, "I'll speak later." But later never comes. The conversation moves on, and you just sit there. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you didn't take the space. Now this doesn't happen once. It happens again, and again, and again. And slowly, people stop expecting you to speak at all. Not because they decided to ignore you, but because you trained them to. The same thing happens outside conversations. Someone cancels on you last minute. You say, "It's okay." Someone disrespects your time. You say, "No problem." Someone crosses a line. You stay silent because you don't want to create tension. You don't want conflict. You want things to stay smooth. But here is the truth. Every time you avoid conflict, you also avoid respect. Because respect is not built when everything is comfortable. It is built when there are limits. When people know there is a line they cannot cross. But in your case, there is no clear line. Everything is flexible. Everything is adjustable. And when everything is flexible, nothing is respected. People start seeing you as someone who will always adjust, someone who will always understand, someone who will never push back. And that changes how they treat you. They interrupt you more. They ignore you more. They take your time for granted because in their mind there are no consequences. You have removed them without even realizing it. This is why boundaries are not about being aggressive. They are about showing people that you value yourself, that your time matters, that your space matters, and that not everything is acceptable. Because the moment you don't have boundaries, people don't see you as kind. They see you as easy. And once you become easy, you stop being respected. The third mistake is over-explaining. There is this constant need to clarify everything. Every decision needs a reason. Every action needs justification. Every no needs a long explanation behind it. And it doesn't even feel wrong at first. It feels responsible. It feels like the right thing to do. But look closely at what actually happens. A simple decision turns into a long explanation. A small boundary turns into a justification. A clear no turns into a paragraph. And somewhere in that process, the original point loses its strength, because the more something is explained, the less firm it sounds. It starts to feel negotiable. Imagine a situation, a plan is made. At the last moment, it doesn't feel right anymore. Instead of just saying, "I won't be able to make it," there is a long message, apologies, reasons, details that were never even asked for. And now the focus is not the decision. The focus is the explanation. And explanations invite discussion. Discussion invites negotiation. And negotiation slowly removes authority. Now the other person doesn't just hear a decision. They see uncertainty. They see hesitation. They see someone who is not fully sure about their own choice. And once that doubt is visible, respect starts slipping. Because strong decisions are simple. They don't need decoration. They don't need defense. They just exist. But when every action is wrapped in layers of explanation, it signals something else. It signals the need for approval. It signals discomfort with being direct. And that changes how people respond. They question more. They push more. They test more. Because now it feels like everything can be discussed, everything can be changed, and the moment everything becomes negotiable, nothing holds weight anymore. This is why over-explaining doesn't make things clearer. It makes things weaker. It takes a simple decision and turns it into something fragile. And fragile things are never taken seriously. The fourth mistake is constantly looking for approval, not in an obvious way, but in small, subtle behaviors that slowly become part of how you act around people. There is always this need to make sure others agree, to make sure things are okay, to make sure no one has a problem with what is being said or done. So before making a decision, there is hesitation. Before saying something, there is a quick check in the mind, wondering how it will be received. And even after doing something, there is a need for validation, a need to feel that it was the right move. At first, it feels normal. It feels like awareness, like being socially smart, like knowing how to behave in different situations. But over time, it starts to change the way others see you. Because when every action depends on how others react, it signals uncertainty. It shows that the final authority is not internal, it is external. And people pick up on that, even if they don't consciously think about it. They notice that decisions are not firm, that opinions can shift, that direction can change depending on the response they give. And once that pattern becomes clear, they start taking that control without even realizing it. They influence more, they guide more, they shape the situation more. Because it feels like they can. Now conversations start to feel different. Instead of two equal sides, one side begins to adjust more than the other. One side begins to check, to confirm, to align constantly. And that slowly removes balance. Because respect is built on stability, on knowing that the other person has their own ground. But when that ground keeps shifting based on reactions, it becomes hard to take it seriously. There is no clear center, no fixed point. And without that, presence becomes weaker. It starts to feel like everything is flexible, everything is open to change, everything depends on approval. And the moment something depends too much on approval, it loses its weight, because it no longer stands on its own. It stands on how others respond to it. That is why constantly seeking approval doesn't make you more likable. It makes you easier to influence. And once that happens, people don't look at you as someone with direction. They look at you as someone who can be shaped. And shaped people are rarely respected. The fifth mistake is something most people don't even notice about themselves. It is the way you carry yourself. Not what you say, but how you show up. Because before anyone listens to your words, they read your presence. And that reading happens instantly. The way you stand, the way you sit, the way you look at people when they talk, all of it sends a signal before you even speak. Now the problem is, when that presence looks uncertain, everything else starts losing weight. You might be saying the right things, but it doesn't land the same way because the delivery doesn't match strength. Think about it. A slight hesitation in posture, a lack of eye contact, a voice that feels unsure. Small things like this don't seem important individually, but together they create an image. And that image tells people how seriously to take you. If that image feels weak, the response changes. People interrupt more easily. They talk over you without thinking. They don't wait for you to finish, not always intentionally, but because nothing in your presence stops them. There is no signal that says, this matters. And when that signal is missing, people follow their own pace. They take control of the interaction without even noticing it. Now compare that to someone who doesn't say much, but holds their space. There is a certain stillness in how they sit, a certain steadiness in how they look, a certain control in how they speak. Nothing is rushed, nothing feels scattered. And because of that, even simple words carry weight. People listen more carefully. They wait, they pay attention, because the presence itself creates that effect. This is not about being loud or aggressive. It is about being grounded, about not shrinking in your own space. Because when you shrink, even slightly, it gives others room to step over you. And that doesn't happen once. It becomes a pattern. The more it happens, the more normal it feels to others. And slowly, without any clear moment, respect starts to fade. Not because of what you said, but because of how you showed up. Because in the end, people don't just respond to words, they respond to presence. And if the presence feels uncertain, the respect will always feel the same. The sixth mistake is talking too much without realizing it. Not just speaking, but filling every gap, every silence, every moment with words. There is this constant urge to keep the conversation going, to avoid pauses, to make sure nothing feels awkward. So whenever there is a moment of silence, it gets filled immediately. Another sentence, another explanation, another thought added on top. And it feels natural. It feels like being social, like being engaged, like keeping things alive. But over time, it starts to have the opposite effect. Because when everything is said, nothing feels important. When there are too many words, none of them carry weight. The conversation keeps moving, but nothing really lands. Now think about how people listen. They don't just listen to words, they react to pauses, to timing, to the space between sentences. That space is what gives meaning. That pause is what lets something sink in. But when there is no pause, no break, no control over when to stop, everything blends together. And when everything blends together, it becomes forgettable. Now imagine someone who speaks less, someone who is comfortable with silence, someone who says something and then stops. That silence creates tension. It creates attention. People wait, they process, they focus more, because there is room for the words to land. This is where control shows, not in how much is said, but in how much is held back. Because the ability to stop, to leave space, to not rush into filling every gap, shows confidence in a way that constant talking never can. But when someone keeps talking, keeps adding, keeps explaining, it starts to feel like they are trying to prove something, trying to hold attention, trying to stay relevant in the moment. And that effort is visible. Even if the words are right, the energy behind them feels restless. And restless energy is hard to respect because it lacks control. Now, this doesn't mean staying silent all the time. It means knowing when to stop, knowing when enough has been said, knowing when a point has landed, and letting that moment exist without rushing past it. Because respect often comes from restraint, from saying less but meaning more, from allowing space instead of filling it. And once that control is there, everything changes. Words start to carry weight, presence becomes stronger, and people begin to listen differently. Not because more is being said, but because nothing unnecessary is being added. It requires something most people avoid, not talent and not luck, but the ability to sit with yourself without distractions, without noise, and actually see what needs to change. Most people won't do that. They will close this video, go back to their habits, scroll, distract themselves, and convince themselves that everything is fine while nothing really changes. But if you are still here, it means something is different. You didn't just listen, you paid attention, you noticed the patterns, and somewhere in those patterns, you recognized yourself. That is where the shift begins. Not outside, but inside, in the small moments where you choose differently. Because respect is not something you ask for, it is something people decide based on what you allow and what you tolerate over time. And the truth is simple. The way people treat you is not random, it is learned. Learned from your reactions, learned from your silence, learned from what you keep accepting again and again. So if something felt uncomfortable while watching this, that is not a bad thing. That is awareness, and awareness is where control starts. Most people will ignore that feeling and go back to being the same version of themselves, but a few won't. A few will actually do something about it. And if you made it this far, you are already ahead of most people watching. So take this seriously. Pay attention to the small moments, because that is where everything begins to change.